Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Joanne, brilliant to have you here. To kick off with, please could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the work that you do?
Well, hello, Alan, and yes, thank you very much for the inviting me on here. So I'm Joanne Young, and I have hopefully a nice website that people can have a look at, which is joanneyoung.co.uk. And my aim is to develop true listening in the population. And I do believe this should be started at a very young age, but I have found that the power of really understanding what it's like to listen makes such a hell of a difference in somebody's own thinking, and it can make somebody think something that they never thought of before. And similar to what we've been talking about, which is Dundee and the Dundee cake. It came out of nowhere from you. And yeah, so I do this through workshops, which is at the moment I'm basically forwarding people to my workshop on transforming meetings, so making effective meetings out of what we've got at the moment, which I do believe has become a meeting for a meeting's sake regime in most organizations. And it's just getting back to basics and common sense for a lot of the things that I'm teaching, but it's funny how it's so difficult to do.
And the reason I'm so interested in the work that you do is because it seems to me that there is a lot of focus on equipping people to be able to talk and get their point across and do a presentation and all of that sort of stuff, but so little comparatively about how do you listen. And what you were saying about meetings rings true as well, because I remember when I was in the corporate world, going to meetings with people more senior than you, for instance, I just remember thinking, I need to make a good impression here. I need to say something that makes sense. But thinking back, I probably wasn't very engaged with the rest of the meeting because I was just intent on doing what I just explained rather than playing an active two-way part in the session. So I'm guessing that your work helps people to balance that out a bit, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that we have fallen into the trap of is thinking that when we're in a conversation that we've got to better the other person, or we've got to give advice, or that person wants you to come back with sort of all the solutions. And quite often, by just listening properly to somebody and seeing what it triggers in your own mind, brings out so much more valuable information. And unfortunately, we are in a competitive society. Yeah, I'm not against that. I think it's brilliant. But ask yourself, why are you thinking you need to better or make a point or put somebody down? Those types of things. So they come into your mind, then are you actually really listening to somebody? Because the whole idea of a conversation, the whole idea of listening to somebody is to find out new information. What's the point if you're just going to repeat what you already know? Because you're not going to learn anything.
That's a brilliant point. And it also touches on how over the last few months, actually, I've been increasingly interested in the percentage of known versus unknown. So, like you've just said, if you have, what you know, what percentage is that? And I've asked people, just to give me an intuitive guess. And so far, the lowest was, I can't remember how many zeros there were, but it was a Kenyan teenager who said, well, I think the known represents about 0.00000001 of what is. And the highest I've had is about 10%. So if that's the case, and it's just in support of what you're saying, isn't it, about listening to others? Okay, well let's get this thing. We're off already. So I'm gonna tip the cards out of the deck. How many piles would you like?
Well, I will have 4 piles, please.
4 piles, okay. And now, which of the piles would you like me to go with? 1, 2, 3, or 4?
I will go with the 4th pile, please.
Okay. And we've got 3 cards in the 4th pile. So 1 to 3.
Oh, well, that scuppers what I was going to go for. I'll go for 3, please.
Okay. So our value word is family.
Oh.
And so the first question is this: what does family mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Well, that's very interesting, because I immediately go, your mind immediately goes to your family. And where are you with your family? How big's the family? Relatives, all those connections. But in fact, lots of other little things are coming in. Family can be used for all sorts of things. Anybody that you've got a connection with. So work colleagues could be your family, but in a business professional sense. And the same with your friends, friendship groups. So to begin with, I'd say, the family is my immediate family, the children. Can't say parents anymore, unfortunately, because they're gone. But all the other relatives that are around, that you suddenly think, oh, they're family, but I have nothing to do with them, mainly because you've just lost touch. And I think family these days, yes, you see, in my mind, this is what I love about thinking out loud, is your mind just goes off. And I'm just thinking about how our family these days are no longer static, moving all over the world. And there's been very good impact of all that happening, but there is that unfortunate part where we lose touch. And whereas in the past we would get so much support from the different generations, that now has, well, I say that's gone, but it's not, it's still there in lots of societies and lots of families. But I can only go by my own experience, and really it's very confined now to just my local area, really. So, which I think is such a shame, because I think as we were talking earlier on about, you learn so much from other people if you're just prepared to listen to their stories. And I remember with my dad, it wasn't until he was later on in life that he started talking about his years when he was basically he wrote a book about how he lost his youth because of the war, and how he went in at 17, started flying planes and things. And he lost, about 5 years of his life, as he puts it. Experiences, obviously. But I was just thinking how we don't hear about those things anymore if we're so far apart from our parents or just other relatives.
Wow, you've opened loads of stuff there, haven't you? So I put a circle around the word connection here because that was one of the first words that came to my mind. And that, like you, exactly like you, I went to family, and I've described that as either the scientific sense of it or the blood sense of it. It is your family, it's indisputable. But actually, I probably have had stronger relationships with some people that I've worked with, for instance, or friends who have felt more like what we call family than the actual family, which is a bit bizarre. And actually, if you think about the narrative that goes around families, it's not always that positive. You think about Christmas when you're all on top of each other, and Auntie Maud is sitting there moaning what's on the television that everybody else has chosen, and all of that sort of stuff. And families can be quite kind of, in my experience, not necessarily my own family, but people talking about theirs, quite bitchy, actually, and quite overtly bitchy rather than not saying very much about it. So there's that whole piece. There's also going off of the scientific branch. There's families of animals and plants and stuff like that. So groupings of stuff. And then when you were talking about how things have changed because our society is more mobile, I agree that it feels like family support networks are diluted as a result of that. But then I was thinking, well, actually, on the positive side, whilst there's been a maybe negative impact as far as geography is concerned, what we're doing now on Zoom has meant that, your daughter in Dundee, you can Zoom with her whenever you want and whenever you're both available. When I was at university, I used to telephone my mum, I think, once a month. So that's very different, right? So that's an interesting space, and it led me to think about, well, if the family network is not there naturally because of geography, what options are there for us to put in place to either compensate or replace what used to be dependent on geography? Because we're not dependent on geography. It's like, I don't think we should just say, oh, well, they're in Dundee, so that's it, I can't communicate. It's about, well, how do I want to develop the relationship with the family, bearing in mind that we're not all together. So, goodness me, you just opened the box. What about the metaphor, John? So it's like, what does the word family bring to you in the way of images or sounds or feelings?
That's a good one. At the moment, image of a family, of an icon, actually, just the typical, parents and children, the standard, family of 4, except I'm a family of 5. But feelings. I suppose there's a slight disappointment that my family is so small, because I have no parents and grandparents, and I feel sad that my children didn't really get to know my parents because they're older. They were in their 80s, 90s.
Okay.
And their father's parents also died very early. So there's a slight disappointment that the family is not as, what's the word? I don't know what the word is, but they don't have that impact.
Generational.
Yes. Whereas a lot of my friends are younger than me, and obviously their parents also had them when they were younger, so they've got the 3 generations.
Yeah.
So there is a slight envy, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah, and very, very slight, but just thinking, oh, that would be so nice if I could have had that for my family set up. Although saying that, my a colleague, many years ago, they lost their parents, but they wanted grandparents for their children. So they advertised for a grandparent.
Whoa.
And they got somebody who had, been widowed and was really keen to be a grandparent. And they gelled, and I understand, I've lost touch with them now, but I understand that it was a fantastic project that ended up being a wonderful relationship. And you were saying about, the biological side, obviously nothing at the time, but they developed that wonderful bond. And it just shows you don't have to be connected by blood. It depends on how you value that person and the relationships you have with them.
Do you know how that idea came about? Because that's a beautiful story.
I don't know, actually. It's just come to me. I just remembered it. Yes, it was. Well, it was when it was in my 20s that yeah, this chap was telling me about it. Yeah, yeah, he's still around. He's still around. I might connect with him again and find out how he did do it. Actually, it's intriguing.
And the commercial bit in my brain is going, oh, I think that's a good business idea. You can recruit,
Yes.
yeah, recruit
Yes.
grandparents.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you do it with going right off topic here. Borrow my doggy. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's borrow my grandparent.
yeah.
Borrow my children.
Mm,
A similar sort of format.
yeah.
But
Well, on the metaphors for me, the bit like you, the image is, you know, like the stereotypical happy family. Um, a sound that comes for me actually is laughter and chatter. I tend to associate that. Um, and I was really interested to hear what you said about you not having your parents, because my mum and dad are both gone too. I do have a stepdad, um, but actually, recently, within our extended family, there's been a lady who suffered from a brain tumor and was not well for like a decade. And she passed last month. So during that time, I remember on a number of occasions thinking how lucky I was that I'm not going to have to go through this with my mum and dad, which is a bit selfish perhaps, but that's the other side of you not having your parents still around. And I think with the people that I know that have had to care for their parents, it's really demanding and stressful, and a situation that we receive no training or support to do. We've got to learn it all ourselves in a terrible situation sometimes. So I'm kind of grateful to not be involved with, or not have the chance to be involved with that as much as some other people have.
and yes, I can see that point of view, definitely. I mean, relief is the word that comes
Yeah,
to my mind, especially as you quite rightly say. Well, as I was saying earlier on, my friends have all got parents that are now getting to that elderly stage. As one person said to me, we revert when we get older. We revert back to being a child again, in the meaning that we then have to start looking after them as they did when we were children.
yeah,
And yes, I must admit, I'm relieved that I don't have that, I suppose, pressure. So it's a bit of selfishness on my part that I don't have to worry about it anymore, and trying to balance it. And
yeah,
I know it was, oh, I'd love to take my, dad on holiday, but it does mean we're really restricted. And, he wants to come, but it doesn't, because he doesn't like coming out of his, you know, normal zone of comfort and routine. Oh dear, yes, routine. But yes, it's very interesting, isn't it? How we can see all sorts of different perspectives of having family, and where they are in our lives.
yeah. And what about you? You mentioned, I think you said family of four for you, right? So that's two children.
Oh no, so family of five. So I've got
Oh,
three
you did say
children.
five. That's right.
Yes, yes.
So who are they then? What are they up?
Well, I've got three older children, and they're both, well, all three are at university. The eldest is just finishing off an MSc. The second one is just finishing her degree in psychology, actually, and then the third one has just started, the one in Dundee, her medicine. So she's got quite a few years ahead of her yet. But they're all completely different. You wouldn't think that they have the same parents. Just
Yeah,
they're so different to to each other, and to a certain extent to us, but it just shows you how we combine all our, the genes and things, and how you know, changes. It's like twins, isn't it? When you hear about twins being so different, yet they're identical. They're identical, so they should be exactly the same.
Yeah. I've never been able to get my head around that, because we had 4 children and they're all grown up, so between 33 and 25. And like you've said, they are all so different in many ways, but at the same time, they get on really, really well. And I'm getting just as much pleasure kind of watching them as brilliant adults as I did them being young children, I think. But what is that about? Because they, they're brought up by the same parents in the same environment. So it just goes to show the effect of other influences as they grow up, I think. Yeah, I've never been able to understand why that's so different. And then you mentioned twins. So my eldest daughter had twin girls in December. And thank you. And already they're starting to look like different characters, so it'll be fascinating to see how that comes along. So let's move along to another question on the ValuesJam card. Now we're having a pretty positive conversation. So let's see what happens when I throw a spanner in the works. Where have you noticed a lack of a family feeling?
Well, I have to be a tad careful here, I think. I have another hat on. My main one is obviously the thinking environment, helping people to think better. Yeah. And one of the things is obviously getting people to recognize what you've just said, that we're all different. We have different experiences. You can't just assume because you come from one environment, you're going to be exactly the same. So I also am an occupational health advisor. So I qualified as a nurse and then went into occupational health. And I've actually worked in lots of different organizations, and mainly emergency services, but industry, aviation, or a lot of different environments. And it's quite interesting how some of them that say that they're really family orientated, probably the worst ones, because they're the ones that are trying to say, yes, we are all inclusive, we love everybody, not in fact words, but we want everybody to feel united.
Yeah.
And in some respects, no. And so why is that? And I think it's back to this competitive edge and feeling vulnerable and feeling defensive. And we go back to our, basic needs of wanting to feel connected, of wanting to feel that real, genuine, authentic interest in ourselves. And so for me, yes, that's where there have been organizations. So where else? Where else? What about yourself? What springs to mind to you?
I think there's a couple of things. One is a colleague that I used to work with, and he moved job. And I saw him about 3 months after he had been in his new organization. And he was telling me about how he felt right at the beginning. And I'm smiling because what he said was, people were really warm and friendly. And I had people just come up to me and say, we know that you've just started and I'm in this role. And, just let me know if there's anything that I can do to introduce you to people or help you or show you the ropes. And he said, and when they were saying that, because of my experience in the previous organization, I could feel myself asking the question, why are you being so helpful? What do you want from me? And so, in the previous organization, there was absolutely a lack of a family feel. It was all out for yourself, rather than, and I think what's coming through from this conversation for me about family feel is that you have a greater sense of duty, responsibility, obligation, but also maybe on a voluntary basis for others rather than just looking out for yourself. So this image has just come, you would throw yourself under a bus for your child, right? And it's that kind of mentality, toned down a bit, that if in a workplace environment, that's where you get really great teams where people are doing it for each other rather than just striving for personal success. So that's one example of a lack of family feel. And then the other one was actually a lady that I was working with, as she was based in Hong Kong, and she was telling me about how she had a child, and when she was at work, there was a meeting taking place, and she told me that it started to overrun. She knew that she had promised her daughter, I think it was, that she was going to take her to the local zoo, and that she had said to the nanny, if I don't get back in time, can you take her? And she was telling me this story and saying, and she told me she still felt really guilty, and that she felt that she wasn't, motherly enough or not family oriented enough. But actually, we turned it around because she was creating her set of practices to help her consciously live according to her values, and family was one of her values. And so her practice was to create boundaries, clear boundaries at work in honor of her family. And she told me that subsequently she was able to leave a meeting because she said, I had this in my diary for 1 hour, and the hour has passed, and I'm going home now because I've told my family that I'm going to be there. And she used the photograph of her child and her nanny at that zoo as a positive reinforcement of her practice. So those one work and one, well, the other one's a bit work as well, but it was more from a very personal perspective. And what about where, if you were to think of the best family experience that you've had, what does that look like?
Best family experience. I think it's just when everybody is all positive. It's so easy to, I've got one boy and 2 girls, and it's very easy for they to bicker because the boy and girl are only 18 months. There's only 18 months difference. And I think there's a bit of competition going on there, more from the boy, should I say, than the girl. And so when everybody's getting on, that's lovely. And I always, you ask for sort of an occasion, and I remember when we were young, when they were younger, that we used to go for dinners out, and I used to always take a pack of cards or a pad of paper, and we would either play cards while we were waiting, or they would have paper and pens, and they would just draw.
Yeah.
And for me, that was so satisfying to think that they were engaging in each other, or they were really using their minds and imagination, and it was just pleasurable. because there's no bickering. And so often you see families out at dinner, restaurants, where either the iPad is right up there, or they're just, just not talking, or there's arguments, or there's, this and that. So yeah, so that's, for me, there's no one occasion, it's just a number of different scenarios.
I think it's similar for me, and probably they revolve around family holidays, actually, when you've got like the pressure of day-to-day chores and work and stuff like that removed, and being able to relax in an environment that is different and interesting. And one does come to mind, actually, which is there's a place called Ulu Deniz in Turkey, and it is a beautiful setting because there's a crescent sandy beach, but then quite close, a really high kind of cliff face. And what you could do was drive for an hour in a Land Rover up to the top of the cliff and then paraglide off the top and just circle down onto this beautiful beach. And the Sam was only about 4 or 5. And when we landed, I just remember thinking that wasn't very responsible. And I remember, the airman suits, like the onesie type of thing. So he had one of these, but it must have been an adult size, and they just rolled up the legs and the sleeves, and he's like just this overall thing. Yeah, so family holidays, I think, for me, and seeing the kids, like you've just said, I think part of it, and what am I doing here? Actually, I'm giving you credit, but I think I'm trying to take some credit as well at the same time for creating the environment, creating a conducive environment. So if you had not chosen to take the cards and the pens and paper or whatever, and if you had allowed the phone and all that sort of stuff, then the dynamic would not have been as positive, right? And I think that, so setting the scene and helping to create and not necessarily design, but foster a conducive environment is a really important part of that, rather than just step away and just let it happen as it will. So pat on the back for both of us, I think.
I was going to say, I'm certainly going to agree with that one.
And so the other thing, actually, I want to jump back to lack of family feel, because there's something that's hanging there for me, and this is like at a big scale, because I get really verging on angry, actually, at how in the world we are not one family. And I might have given this example on ValuesJams before, but I picture a couple of aliens in their spaceship looking down on the planet, right? And one says to the other, "Whoa, look at what's going on down there. That's quite interesting, because look at all that wealth over there. But seems like a lot of it's being wasted." And then the other one says, "Yeah, you're right. And look over there. There's people that don't have clean water, they don't have enough food, and they're dying, and they don't have medicine. What crazy dudes are running this show?" And the first one says, "Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Shall we report back that there's no sign of intelligent life and keep searching?" So it's this thing about, how is it in the world when we do have enough resources, why is it acceptable that people haven't got the basics that they need? Sorry, it's a bit of a downer, a bit serious, but I just don't get it.
Yes, I have heard you give that example before. So I have been listening to your podcast. Yes, and when you're saying that, it springs to mind about, social media, how the world has become so negative in some respects. And again, I don't want to bring it down, but we're just always looking at the worst case scenario, and in turn thinking, well, that's going to affect me, so I'm not going to engage in that, because if I engage in that, then I'm going to lose out. And we're back to being, I think, quite a selfish society. I don't really know where I'm going with this, but just the fact that instead of looking outward, we continually look inward. I mean, you can see, and we've had discussions about this before, about well-being and everything. What can I do to help me, all the time? And there's enough research out there and evidence to show that if you actually help somebody else and actually get the positive across to the other person and they feel good, it really does affect your own well-being and you feel better for it. And I think for me, that's an area that probably, if we could start building that in, we would then say, oh gosh, I have got all this. But if I gave it to those people over there in that country, then they'd really feel good. And then I'd feel better. So it's a sort of, I don't know, reverse psychology. I don't know.
Yeah, it is that thing, isn't it, about how people in other countries seem very far away, and that's not me. So I think that might be part of the potential barrier. But then again, with how technology is developing, there's a lady in Brazil who runs a virtual exchange for schools. So imagine, I don't know, your local school having a Zoom call with that school that I mentioned earlier with the Kenyan teenagers, and both groups of children being able to understand the other group's life and the way that they live. And I think that could help enormously, actually, to foster a greater sense of one family in the world, because historically we've been like in our own bubbles, and we don't really understand, or from a young age, we don't really have an appreciation of what's happening elsewhere.
I think that's a brilliant idea, suggestion. Go with it. I think, again, and I hate to keep coming back to social media and sort of the news, but we only get to see certain bits. And so we are becoming more and more isolated. And as you just said, we don't actually see it from the other perspective. We don't actually understand what other people are going through. And it could be anywhere, yes, in a third world country, but in this country, it's so important to understand, or try and get yourself into a place where you can actually see what it's like to be on the other side of the coin. And and I don't think we have enough of that.
And actually, you mentioning like this country, I saw a report, was it last week, where it was saying that the 10% poorest people in the UK is now less well off than the poorest 10% in Poland, I think it was. Now, again, the question is, in a developed country, in a progressive thinking country, why are we allowing that to happen? I just, anyway, don't understand. So let's
I love the alien story that you brought in, because that just sums it up so well. If you're looking from the outside, what on earth are we doing? But yeah.
So the next question then, is, on ValuesJam, you can invent your own question. So let me invite you to do this. So ask your own question about family, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how.
I have heard this on your sessions before, and I'm not totally sure what you mean by it, but perhaps the question I'd say is, how would I, after this conversation, connect better with my own family? Ooh. External family.
What do you mean by external family?
well, actually, perhaps that's not the right word, but people not in my immediate vicinity, but people that, because of distance, because of just losing touch.
Okay. So is that how to engage better with your extended family? Is that the beyond your close family?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay. So what does that look like? What does that family look like beyond the close family?
Not totally sure what you mean by that.
Well, where are they? How many of them are
I
there?
see. Um, Majority are in the Midlands. I'm down in the south,
Yeah.
and then I've got a couple in a different country. Well, quite a few in different countries. So it's really not so much the other countries. It's actually in this country that I think the mindset is, oh, they're a couple of hours away and easy to. It's like all this thing, isn't it? Easy to
Yeah.
do, but you never get around to doing it. And it actually comes back to me trying to get a better balance in my work life side of things,
Okay.
and actually putting boundaries in to making time to make these connections, I think. And so often I think, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it
Yeah.
next.
Yeah.
So
What's the motivation for you?
I think it's, motivation, very good word, actually. Motivation. There is a part of I should get in contact. So that lovely word should. But I want to, because I want to find out how they're getting on. And I know one particular relative is struggling with their parent, as you say, they're having issues, and it's just to be there to give them the support. And I feel that they know that they've got the support from me, but I think there's nothing better than just keep reinforcing it.
Mm.
Um,
And
yeah.
what are we talking about in terms of numbers?
No, oh, numbers. Many now. So not many, dozen maybe. Mind you, again, I don't know how many children have, been produced in different sectors. But
But
of
it's
course,
so
because I've lost my parents,
yeah.
uh, I don't know. They were very contained. They didn't really talk about families and things like that. And there's a little bit of, the skeleton in the cupboard type situation. So I don't necessarily know all my family. And there is a part of me that would love to do the ancestry
Oh yeah.
tree. But I
Yeah.
know that it's been started a number of times and it becomes sort of a dead end. So yes, and while I'm talking, because I'll keep talking if I can. I recently did a genealogy
Yeah.
test, and my daughter now wants to do it because I'm perfect, of course. No, whereas so she wants to know what's happening with her father's side.
Okay.
Because it's quite interesting how there's various issues, medical issues and things. So I think she wants to get it done because she says, well, obviously you're going to be boring because there's nothing wrong with you.
Just so going back to your question about how can you engage with those people in your family beyond the close family, if from what you've said there are around about 12 either people or units or whatever you want to call them, just in my sort of simple way of thinking of things, that's one a month. So one thing that you could do is just make a list of those 12 and put them on the next 12 months and make a commitment to reach out and see what happens from that point. But I guess it depends on what sort of a person you are, because somebody who is kind of structured and enjoys saying, "Oh yeah, well I've put it in place, and so now I'm just going to do it." That will work for them. But somebody who's a bit more spontaneous might just choose, I don't know, to keep a cup with each of their names written on, folded up on a piece of paper, and when they feel like it, just dip in, take one out, and get in touch. So what works best for you?
It would be the spontaneous.
Okay.
Because, yeah, if I see something in there, I'll say, oh, I can't be bothered now. I'll put it off to tomorrow or the next day. So sometimes if I've put something in and then I think I've got to do it, it's that word of I've got to do it rather than want to do it.
Yeah.
Probably the cup full of names would work better for me.
Okay. And I'm just thinking about the same question. So my ex, or my ex, yeah, not extended, but like beyond close family isn't much actually. So I have a sister who I'm not that close to. We see each other occasionally, and that's all well and good. And I'm not interested to do anything more than that. And then her children we see occasionally, but I'm not feeling, oh, you really should, do this or that. Then who else is there? So my children, then their kids, but that's close family. I've lost touch with my mum's brothers and sisters and their children. So there's just like nothing there, and I don't have any inclination to kind of go find that. Oh, I did. So a few years ago, I did some work in Wrexham, and that's where my dad was born. And so that prompted me to get in touch with his brother. And we had a couple of conversations, but we never met up actually. So and again, I'm not minded to do that. So that's a pretty boring answer to your question, actually.
Thanks. You give me the question.
Yeah. So just on you, when you said you're not sure what it means, it's the opportunity for one of us to just ask a question on the topic of family in any way you want. And the reason that we put in the who, what, where, when, why, or how was to make sure that people used an open question rather than said, have you ever done anything bad to your family members? It's like yes or no, and that's
it. Why did that spring to mind?
Well, actually, I was thinking about my sister. I think my mum told me that the reason she thought we weren't that close was because when my sister was still in a pram, I went to give her a kiss and she bit my lip really hard. And my mum said, I think that was the beginning of it. Okay, well, so I don't know that that's the best note for us to bring this to a close, a biting lip. But the final question is always the same in ValuesJam, and I think this isn't going to be so tricky actually, because we've touched on a few things that we could play with here. But what are you encouraged to do differently about family as a result of our conversation?
The immediate thing that springs to mind is to not judge my family. That to avoid that, avoid that judging that maybe, they should have been in touch, or why are they doing something that way? I don't agree with their views on that. And bring back, which is part of, one of my values, is equality, and that we are all different and we shouldn't judge, and we should really sit with that when you're connecting with that person, rather than trying to think, oh, I wouldn't have done it like that. Or so for me it would be yes, not to really engage with why maybe I'm not connecting with them. is it from my side, or is it, am I judging them? Is it something? So yes, it's that judgment, I think. Change how I view my family.
And so how might you help yourself do that in practice? Because what you've just described is kind of a noble sentiment, but sometimes it's a challenge to translate something like that into practical action. So when would you be in a situation where you can practice what you just said about avoiding judgment?
Yes, I've got one straight away.
Have you?
And it's, I don't agree with the relationship.
Okay.
So I've stepped back from connecting with that particular relative because I don't. And what am I, if they're happy and they're enjoying it, so what am I, that's really very poor on my part, because I don't know. Nobody knows what relationships, how they are, how they, what are they satisfying, and they seem to be incredibly happy. So what am I to say? Oh well, I'm not going to connect with you because you don't. So yeah, so I think it's I will revisit my thoughts on that one and try and be a bigger person.
Okay. And mine's similar to yours, but it's almost the other side of the coin. And let me explain. I've chosen to allow my kids to lead their own lives. And I have made a conscious choice not to be kind of overpowering in their faces, meddling, all of that sort of stuff. And I'm not sure where that has come from. But this conversation has made me think, is there a risk that they might interpret that as not being interested? So I think I'm going to take the opportunity to speak to each of them when I next see them individually about why it's like that and what their perspective of it is, because I'm assuming that they understand that I'm giving them their space, but feel they might feel differently actually. So thank you. That's it's an interesting thought.
Good luck.
Well, Lucy is the eldest, and her partner. What was it? They had some work done in the house recently, and the guy that was organising it didn't do a brilliant job. And Lucy's partner Fred said to me, Lucy has this uncanny knack of being able to give very direct feedback. So I'm sure she'll have no problems telling me what she thinks.
I wonder where she learned that from.
All right, so Joanne, I'm not sure if that's I know that you've had a bit of a play with the cards, but I don't know if you've had we've had a 1 hour session just exploring that one value of family, and it's been really enlightening for me. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's great to take it in the lengthy awareness of the cards and using the questions. So thank you very much. I know that I have sort of played with them with my daughter, the youngest one, the Dundee one, the Dundee cake, and she said, "Oh, I never thought of it like that."
Oh,
Well, I can't remember what the word was now, but yeah, I think it was relationships actually. And so, like I've said to you before, I think the power is in those cards, and to be open and be ready to see what pops up. So thank you.
All right. You take care. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.